Vladimir Tatlin. But for Tatlin, I have another presentation. Just a second, please. Tatlin, okay. Now, Tatlin is a very interesting case because he was actually not an architect, but he became very famous because of that monument for the Third International, as it was called. A very interesting man. He was actually Ukrainian, but he studied in Russia and he worked in Russia, but he was actually Ukrainian, who also he was a sailor. He did all kinds of things. Here it is a picture of him as a sailor. And, you know, I regret that there aren't probably any students here at this moment, but I would have liked to challenge them with the example of a man who meant a lot for architecture, although he lived at a time and in a place where people did all kinds of things without necessarily diplomas and doctorates and so on. So Tatlin, he was a Soviet painter, but was a Russian, Ukrainian, and Soviet painter, architect, and stage designer. Tatlin achieved fame as the architect who designed the third monument, the monument to the Third International, more commonly known as Tatlin's Tower, which he began in 1919. So he was 27 years old. No, did I add? Well, no, 34 years old when he did the Tatlin's Tower, the famous Tatlin's Tower, with Kazimir Malevich, who influenced a lot Zaha Hadid, among others. So with Kazimir Malevich, he was one of the two most important figures in the Soviet avant-garde art movement of the 1920s, and he later became an important artist in the constructivist movement. Now, these almost Renaissance people at the beginning of the 20th century, they continue to inspire us. Why? Because they also had the luck, so to speak, but it was also a misfortune. It turned out to become a misfortune that, you know, it was not just a change in aesthetics, but it was also a change in society because of the Soviet Soviet state coming into being, the dream of a new man, a new society, and so on. Why is the avant-garde, the Russian avant-garde, so very potent even today? Because it was a conjunction of a revolution in aesthetics and a revolution at the societal level and political level. And so it wasn't just about art. It was mainly and firstly about life and then about art, or they happened simultaneously. I'll show some works, a few works. This is a short presentation, or more like a first step into the world of Tatlin. He was a painter first, so here you see a painting by him, the eternal fascination male painters had with a feminine body. And then we see a scene design, a stage design for a play, A Life for the Tsar, from 1913. So he was 28 years old, and he returned to the theater later on. From what I read, he was accused later in his life of being anti-communist, kind of a bourgeois artist, and fortunately he was not killed, or he didn't disappear, but he lost his job, and then he worked for the theater again in the 50s, towards the end of his life. But in 1913, you see here references, obvious references to the Gothic architecture, the Gothic interiors. And there is an expressionist here, which also the Germans used to refer to and employ quite often, like Hans Pelzig and others. It's kind of interesting that you have German architects and Russian or Soviet architects. Well, that in 1915 was not yet, I don't know if it was already the Soviet, if the word would have been proper, but the reference to the Gothic was employed both in Germany and here. Now we arrive at the famous Tatlin Tower, and it was famous and still fascinates. And why does it fascinate? Because although it was never built, well, they built a replica, some years ago, but during his lifetime, it was not built. But it's a very interesting work because it was a building that was supposed to celebrate, the victory of the proletarians. It also, it is in a way ambiguous because it employs the spiral. There is a growth, but there is also a falling because it is sloping. And so, yeah, you can see it here. So it has a certain fragility, I think, and a certain ambiguity. It is not emphatically vertical. It is not emphatically and unquestionably pointing towards an unending progress. It's both being and becoming, if I am to become a philosopher now in a questionable way. I like this tower very much because it is, and it is a very famous, and they studied in architecture schools and so on. It is actually almost a contemporary vision, although it took place 100 years ago. This kind of, if you compare it with Tour Eiffel in Paris, what a difference. Tour Eiffel in Paris is very conventional and conformist. Yes, it's tall. Yes, the engineering was good, but architecturally and in terms of its symbolism, it's more simplistic. This one shows even signs of some melancholia, I feel tempted to say. Although the people in the lower left corner didn't have, I think, the luxury of the bourgeois feeling, which melancholia is. So anyway, this is a later model of this celebrated tower, and you could find on the internet other pictures of it. Okay, now from 1920s, from the politics of architecture and the architecture of politics, we go into, apparently he was also interested in fashion. In 1920s, 100 years ago, he designed this. Well, I don't know. I mean, this kind of dress or clothing would be acceptable even today, I think. Anyway, he did all kinds of things. Costumes again, 1923, 1924. Now, if you would have such, clothing in the storefront window of, I don't know, Gap or Bananas Republic in the United States, I don't know if that company is still alive. Or I don't know, maybe even something more fashionable, it would be still acceptable. They look, I don't know, they don't look like they were from 100 years ago. Anyway, what do I know about fashion? And now, a very interesting sculpture from 1929, 1931, a human-powered ornithopter. It's interesting that the helicopter became an animal in a way. This meeting between the machine and the animal is interesting, and it is a very interesting sculpture. Look at it. So it's supposed to fly, but it is. I like it very much. It's surreal. It could function perhaps in a certain way. It's the work of imagination, but it is an imagination which doesn't rely on technicisms alone. It's a fantastic machinery or object, and it is a sculpture. But I think aesthetically, at least, is very appealing. And again, it's like in the Tatlin's Tower where there was the spiral motif. Here we have not the spiral, but the spider, maybe. And I don't know. I like it as a sculpture. Now, if it was meant to also fly, I don't know. And this is a continuation of that work. Le Tatlin or Le Tatlin, he played with the word, I think, his own name, and he just put in front of it Le, L-E, number 3, human-powered ornithopter, and here it is. So what I see in this work is some kind of an attempt similar to the attempts of Leonardo to bring aesthetics into the field of techne, into the field of technology. And you don't quite know here. Is he serious technically, or is concerned just with aesthetics? But visually, and I can only evaluate it visually, I like very much what I see. Uh, and now a last image from his work, but really I don't and didn't do justice to him. But this was an attempt to wish him happy birthday on his birthday. It is today his birthday, and just to show a few samples of his work. This was a drawing of a window cleaner and a portrait of V. I think that V is Vladimir himself, brush on paper, 1942. And it's in a way an amusing artwork. Is Vladimir, I guess, on the right, and the lady cleaning the window, and you probably can imagine a little bit what is in the mind of Mr. V, Vladimir. Just like Malevich, he returned to figurative art later on in his life. And this is something to think about, because the constructivist Malevich gave up, turned his back on his black on black, and became a figurative painter. He began to paint peasant, women. And here we have Vladimir, kind of morose and solitary, thinking, I don't know about what, or I do know about what. Anyway, so